So I just picked some random spot. I think I'm in Colorado here. Um, and we're just going to walk through the kind of things I look for, we'll shift gears and do a little bit of elk e-scouting, in case any of you are one day interested in doing something like that.
All right, you should be good, Brian.
Okay, screen. I'm on my work deal, so I have I have 4 screens to play with here. We'll go with this screen. That's the one. All right, you guys see it?
Yep.
Cool. So when I'm looking at this stuff, I'm kind of looking pretty much at everything that Torrin just talked about, except with a few little modifications. When I'm looking at a new area, there's a couple things, especially for elk, that I'm looking for, and that's the first one being pressure and terrain features that they're definitely not going to be in. So one of the first things I do when I'm checking out a new area is I look for in the western states, these mountains have a lot of rock slides, and if you zoom in, you can see it just piles of rocks that just fell over. The elk aren't really hanging out or going to be moving through rock slides. So you can actually find a lot of your good pinch points on, different hillsides by the amount of rock slides, because an elk will, be going in between the rock slides. They won't be kind of going through them. For example, here, I don't have this one really in here, but you can see this is all rock right here. But then you have, some meadow over here with only a little rock. And plus, on top of that, you have a saddle right here as well. So more than not, that's their travel path to get over into this area over here. Another thing too is, let's put the topo on quick.
Yeah, I was going to say, show the topo and show that saddle.
Right.
More to find out there.
Right. So kind of elk move a lot more than deer. They don't tend to stick in a smaller area like deer do. They're going to be moving all over the place. So I try and, look at general basins. And a basin is pretty much just like if you picture just a bowl, and your ridge tops are the top of the bowl, and it all sinks down into like a valley. So you can see in the topography right here, this is one of your basins right in here. This is actually a pretty big one. And you can actually tell all your water's going into these ponds and stuff. So these elk essentially move from basin to basin. So kind of the first thing I'd like to look at is, I take a look at all these different basins and see what's their most likely path to get from basin to basin, because they're not going to be in this basin, more than a day or two before they, move over to the next one. They travel. So that's kind of the first thing I'm trying to look at. And one of the best things to do is to put your imagery on and kind of find these rock slides, especially on like the edges of each basin. And you could kind of get a good understanding of where they're going to be moving through to get to their core area that they might typically stay in while they're in that particular basin. Another thing too that's cool about OnX is it tells you which trails are good for motor vehicles like quads, ATVs, side-by-sides, that kind of things, and which ones are only available for walking or horses. So these purple trails, that basically means that motor vehicles can drive on all these purple ones. So they're not really going to be hanging out in those areas because it's easy access for most people. And I like to get into areas where, it's harder to get into because they're less pressured. And that's where the elk are going to be, especially in, heavy hitting states where elk are hunted. Another cool feature that OnX has is in their hunt section is called their roadless areas, which I use this all the time. Even in Pennsylvania, actually, Torrin could have put it up. That first area we talked about where we're doing our backcountry hunt, that's one of your most roadless areas in Pennsylvania, even though it's still pretty close to roads relatively to some places out here. But I like to turn this on, and it looks like it's going to be delayed here. But anyways, you can put this roadless areas on, and it'll actually highlight all throughout your map the areas where it's farthest, walking distance from roads. But anyways, I think we have a pretty good roadless area over in here, which we could look over in this area later, but I kind of already checked this one out. So one of the first things I'm doing is I'm finding these rock slides, and I'm circling them because I really don't want to walk through them anyways, and kind of setting that up. The next thing you really want to look for with elk is elk need water at least like 4 or 5 times a day. They're not so much like a deer where they could, fill up overnight and then just bed down all day. Elk need, I forget, it's like a few gallons of water a day. So that means, especially, early season like September, when you're most likely hunting archery, they're getting up in the middle of the day at least 2 or 3 times to get water. So that's another good thing to look at on the topo. The OnX topo maps actually have pretty good water locations. You're not going to really find them close to the trails because there's a lot of heavy traffic there. So I typically look for water sources near their bedding areas where it's just like a little quick hop over into them and then go back to sleep. So there's a couple of them right here. I look there and then I kind of confirm them. Usually they might be a little bit off. And as you can see, to get to this water source, they really only have one option. Elk also like to bed on north-facing slopes. So that's another thing to look out for in your topography. That's because the sun's going to hit those north-facing slopes the least throughout the day. So, and they're going to be bedded in these thick pine trees for the most part. Sometimes you'll see them bedded closer to these meadows, but for the most part, they're in some pretty thick stuff, and it's an easy little hop from them to go through this pinch point, grab some water, and then go back to sleep. Another area right here, there's some good water here, and then they can hop right around this saddle and come out in these greener areas to feed. Another thing I look for is wallows, and they're just kind of like more shallow type of water, and you can actually see the trails. Now, one thing to think about here, this could be elk, but it could also be cattle. A lot of ranchers get permits to graze their cattle on the public lands out here, but this looks pretty promising. It looks like there's steady traffic into these wet areas. The elk will go into these like shallow, muddy waters, and they'll roll around in them and stuff. And you'll know if it's a wallow pretty much right off the bat. I guarantee this one gets hit right here or right in here by elk. There'll be mud, splashed all over the place. They roll around with it. They dig their antlers in it and stuff like that. So this is looking like a pretty good spot to me. Just because they have the wallow there. There's an easy access to water right in here, and they're right by a good north-facing slope to, sit in the shade and bed down, they can hop right in this saddle and come out into this and feed. That's pretty much what I'm looking for when it comes to elk. And then what you can do is you can, find these core areas like this where they may be hanging out and, zoom out at a larger scale, maybe hop over into this next basin here. Maybe they're only over there for 2 days, but there's a day that they're over here. So, this looks like a pretty large rock slide right in here. Another one right in here. So this is probably their travel corridor down into this basin. We can throw the map on, and kind of look around for some good water sources, maybe down in here where they're traveling to get their water each day. Typically in the mornings and evenings, they're out in these little fields feeding. They'll come out, they'll feed for a while. This is all pretty good looking stuff all throughout here. And, once the sun starts coming up, they'll, mosey their way into the shade, into this dark timber, and just kind of bed down for the day until they need water. That's kind of all I have to add to it. I mean, Torrin covered quite a bit of good stuff that relates to both scenarios. Those are some of the additional things that I kind of think about and look at when I'm thinking about elk. Any questions?
I think I'm good.
What was that?
Nope, all good here, bro.
Oh, cool. The tougher thing about elk is, how much they move. I mean, you got to find them first to be able to, set up on them. And one day they might be here. The next day they might be 10 miles away somewhere else. They really like to move, but if you can find some good areas like this and, try and stick it out, usually within, they make their rounds between, every couple of days, they'll be back in this stuff. It might take 4 or 5 days, but they'll be back. And there might be other smaller herds that use the same kind of things. Looking at sign and the freshness of sign is pretty important when you're hunting elk. If you see super fresh stuff the day you get there, they're probably not going to be around for another couple of days. But if you see some older stuff that's like maybe a week old, that's probably going to be a hot spot within the next day or two, from my experience at least.
We got a question here about how to set up basically on the wind.
Yeah.
Brian, why don't you touch on that? I mean, if you want to dive even into it on the whitetail side of things, go ahead. As far as how you would pick locations based on wind.
So, when you're hunting elk in archery season, if it's kind of like the later morning, afternoon, after they've already gone to bed, typically what I like to do is you're definitely paying attention to your thermals and whatever your general wind direction is that could be changing it. But as the heat rises, you have to understand which direction you're coming from. So if you're coming up the hill, that may not be beneficial. So what I like to do is when I have a pretty good understanding of where these elk are, like maybe I woke up early and I glassed them in one of these fields over here from a glassing spot over here. and I watch them walk into the timber here, I can almost assume they're going to hop over this and try and bed down in this area. So if I'm over here, rather than trying to hop over and get close to them, typically I'm going to try and follow that contour that I believe they're in, and maybe I'll swing around and come at that same contour, because if I have no general wind and I'm just depending on the thermals, they're going to be pushing, up and down, not left to right. So if I stay on the elk's general elevation, there's no way for their wind to catch me, per se. And then, I might hop around, this hilltop over here and just get right into this timber and start making some calls. And if there's a bull in there, or even, a small group of cows or something, just a couple cow elk calls, that will likely intrigue them enough, even if they're not talking yet, to, they're curious animals and they're herd animals. So if they hear some cow calling in here, they might be inclined to get up and come check out what's going on. So, when I'm putting stalks on elk, after the morning or before the evening, I'm trying to stay on their contour level as I approach and get closer to them, and then try and call them into me.
Brian, when you set up on them like that, do you have them coming towards you on the same contour line, on the same elevation, or do they try to get downwind of you or down?
So that's a good question. I mean, it depends on the elk. If he's a smart one, he's going to try and, hop around and try and catch my wind. But what's cool about this area here is you have this sharp turn. So I'm going to get into this timber and I'm not going to crest over this, because another thing too, they're not dumb. So when you're calling to them, they know exactly where you are when you call. So when they get within a certain area where they know they should see you, they're going to stop. Okay. So if I set up and I start calling back in here, even if he's going to loop around, by the time he crests over here and would even have a chance to get a whiff of my wind, I'm going to be able to see him, and he's within shooting range. So that's kind of how I like to set up on him. You don't want to get to a point where you're, back here and calling, and he gets out into this field. All right, I know there should be an elk here in this field. I should be able to see it. That's where it called. He's just going to turn around and go. Or he's going to get more curious and try and start, turning around and trying to sniff you. But if you can set up, right on this edge, so he has to make that turn in order to either catch your wind or see you, and that puts him in your shooting range. That's kind of what I'm targeting when I'm setting up on, something like this.
Yeah, I mean, I was just kind of thinking about potentially using that as a tactic for whitetail hunting. If you're on a bed, like I had mentioned earlier, that you can't really get in on, and I wouldn't do this unless you have a bunch of spots that you have, and it's okay to burn a couple out. But doing that exact same thing where you have a bull like that, getting on the edge of that bull and doing some buck runs just to potentially get a little bit of a challenge on that deer right in his bedroom.
And another thing I just noticed, there's another rock slide right here. He's probably not going to be messing with this. So you can put that in consideration. Maybe your setup is, somewhere right in here where he has to crest over to this other side to be able to see you, or maybe you're afraid the wind's going to come down. You could hop down here. He might hop over this way.
What about that little section what about that little section of timber there that goes through that rock slide where it really pinches? Do you think that's still too rocky there?
No, so I've seen sign and stuff like this before. They'll come up into the edge of these. They'll break their ankles if they go in this stuff. They'll run through it if they need to, but it's something they try and avoid. But where you see the pine trees, they can typically go, but they for the most part kind of stay out of that stuff. But I've put it this way, I've seen a lot of dead elk carcasses in areas like this. So they may get to it, or they may have a wolf or something, whatever it may be, chase them into these, and they kind of get themselves stuck because they can't get through the rock slide, and they're kind of goners. So I don't really think they like to get into this stuff all that much.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. You want to switch over